The U.S. Navy's Mk-10 Hedgehog anti-submarine projector helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Admiral Sumu Toyota, the newly appointed commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, faced harsh realities. By May 1944, Allied air and naval power in the Pacific was expanding rapidly. Enemy forces were advancing fast and had already seized large parts of New Guinea, the Admiralties, and the Marshall Islands. Toyota still could not be sure whether the next American push would drive west toward Palau and the Philippines or north into the Marianas. His mobile First Fleet, roughly 40 warships including 10 battleships and 6 carriers, could break any enemy assault, but it had fuel for only one major surface operation. Before committing Japan's last battle fleet, he needed hard evidence of U.S. naval movements and intentions. Much had changed since the uncertain days of 1941-42. Japanese long-range patrol planes that once reached deep into Allied-held areas could seldom penetrate enemy air defenses now, and American improvements in communication security made the radio interceptions that had been so valuable early in the war largely useless. Submarines were therefore Toyota's only reliable eyes at sea. Unfortunately, Japan's largest, most capable fleet boats were being pressed into service as supply ships, ferrying food and provisions to isolated Imperial Army garrisons cut off by faster Allied advances. That left Submarine Squadron 7 under Rear Admiral Noboru O, with smaller Row-class boats to do the scouting. Those subs were designed for coastal patrol and lacked the surface radar Oda deemed essential for effective reconnaissance, but they carried some of the Navy's toughest, most experienced crews, 40 to 60 men per row class, most combat veterans, anchored at Saipan in the Marianas, and dangerous to any Allied ship that drifted inside their periscope sights. Oda's orders, however, were to locate and report enemy warships rather than to sink them. His boats were to man the Na Line, a roughly 200-mile stretch between New Guinea and the Carolines, and radio back positive sightings of any Allied armada steaming for the Philippines. Armed with that confirmation, Admiral Toyota hoped to sail his combined fleet into the decisive battle he believed would secure Japan's victory. On May 15, 1944, the 7 Row-class submarines of Squadron 7 put out from Saipan to take up positions along the Na Line. Their roughly 650-mile voyage would take 6 days, and personnel on Saipan and at Combined Fleet headquarters in Japan watched them closely. Another group tracked Squadron 7 from a secure facility at the U.S. Naval Base in Pearl Harbor, the top-secret Fleet Radio Unit, Pacific, FRUPAC, the Signals Intelligence Center responsible for collecting and decrypting intercepted enemy radio traffic. FRUPAC had already played a key role in Operation Vengeance, the interception that killed Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, and in the Midway Triumph, the unit's mathematicians, codebreakers, linguists, and electronics specialists were about to shape events again. On May 13, 1944, an otherwise routine radio transmission began a chain of events that led to one of the most notable anti-submarine actions in history. The captain of Fleet Submarine I.16, Lieutenant Sander Yoshitaka Tucci, sent a short encrypted Reports saying his boat would arrive with provisions on May 20th for the garrison bypassed at Buon, on the southwest tip of Baffin Island. American technicians intercepted Tucci's message, and Frupac analysts were able to deduce his route and estimated arrival time. That information was forwarded at once to Admiral William F. Halsey's 3rd Fleet headquarters in Pearl Harbor. Because the intelligence was time-sensitive, subject to change by weather, mechanical problems, or shifting sea conditions, Halsey had to act quickly. Knowing an enemy submarine's likely location did not automatically guarantee the Navy could reach and sink it before it altered course. Fortunately for the Allies, near Piva Bay off Florida Island in the southern Solomons, a small anti-submarine force stood ready. Escort Division 39, made up of 3 newly commissioned Buckley-class destroyer escorts, USS England, DE-635, USS Old George, DE-697, and USS Raby, DE-698, then on their first combat cruise. Few sailors aboard those DEs had seen action. Their prior duties had been routine convoy escort, but events were about to harden them into veteran ASW hands. On May 18th, 3rd Fleet transmitted the submarine's estimated position and ordered escort. Division 39 to intercept the Japanese boat believed to be steaming to resupply Buon, warning it was expected from the north and should reach the area around 1400 hours on May 20th. Each Buckley-class DE measured about 306 feet with a 36-foot beam, displaced roughly 1,740 tons fully loaded, was driven by 2 General Electric turbo-electric engines capable of about 24 knots, had a cruising range in excess of 5,000 miles, and typically carried about 198 enlisted men. Each Buckley-class destroyer escort carried roughly 15 officers alongside nearly 200 enlisted sailors, and together they operated an array of sensors designed to detect and track enemy threats above and below the sea. For surface contacts, the crews relied on search radar that could spot ships far beyond visual range, while bed-spring air search radar scanned the skies to provide early warning of incoming aircraft. The heart of their anti-submarine system, however, was the TSL-1 sonar, a device that transmitted powerful pulses of sound known as pings into the depths. When those sound waves bounced back from a solid object such as a submarine, trained sonar operators could carefully analyze the echoes, measuring the direction and distance of the target with remarkable precision. These young sailors had to differentiate between the faint distortions of marine life and the sharper, more metallic return of a submerged vessel, often while standing long hours in the dark confines of the sonar room where the survival of their ship depended on their judgment. Though detection was critical, the destroyer escorts also carried formidable weapons designed to kill once the prey was located. Each ship mounted 3 3-inch 50-caliber dual-purpose deck guns, 2 forward and 1 aft, along with quad 1.1-inch anti-aircraft mounts and rapid-firing 20mm Oerlikons to fend off aircraft or small surface craft. On their fantail, they carried racks and K-gun projectors that could hurl heavy depth charges in patterns across the water, each canister packed with hundreds of pounds of explosives meant to rupture a submarine's hull. In addition, they were equipped with 3 21-inch torpedo tubes for use against larger surface ships, But the weapon that truly transformed their effectiveness was the newly introduced hedgehog spigot mortar, a forward-firing projector of British design. Each salvo hurled 24 small contact-fused bombs in a wide spread up to 270 yards ahead of the ship. Unlike depth charges, which detonated at preset depths and often allowed skilled submarine captains to escape in the confusion, the hedgehog charges exploded only on impact. This meant that silence after a salvo often indicated a miss, but any detonation confirmed a direct hit, usually crippling or destroying the target. By 1944, Japanese submarine commanders had become adept at dodging traditional depth charge barrages. But against destroyer escorts carrying hedgehog and sonar, the odds had shifted. The escorts could maintain sonar contact throughout the attack run, adjust course and speed as the submarine maneuvered, and then release the hedgehog projectiles with pinpoint accuracy, dramatically raising the likelihood of a kill. Hunting an enemy submarine demanded flawless teamwork. The sonar operators had to track the target's evasive moves in real time, relaying data to plotting rooms and the bridge. Officers had to make swift calculations and issue helm orders, while gun crews and hedgehog teams stood ready to fire at a moment's notice. Down below, engineers maintained full power and responded instantly to orders for changes in speed or direction. Every sailor, whether manning a radar scope, a hedgehog launcher, or an engine room throttle, was part of a tightly coordinated effort where even a minor mistake could give the hunted submarine the chance to escape or strike back. Training for such intricate tasks became an obsession, and crews drilled relentlessly to the point where responses were instinctive. USS England, one of the 3 ships of Escort Division 39, embodied this spirit of constant preparation. Commissioned. In December 1943, and named in honor of Ensign John Charles England, who had perished during the attack on Pearl Harbor, she quickly developed a reputation for toughness and discipline. Her officers and crew committed themselves to excellence not only in ship handling and maintenance, but especially in the mastery of her weapons systems. They knew their work was a matter of survival. Failure against a Japanese submarine meant the prospect of being trapped and lost at sea with no rescue. The ship's executive officer, Lieutenant John A. Williamson, only 26 years old and a native of Birmingham, Alabama, played a key role in shaping the England into a razor-sharp weapon. Commissioned as a reserve officer in 1940, he had already gained valuable combat experience on USS Livermore in the North Atlantic during the dangerous height of the German U-boat campaign. There he witnessed firsthand the devastation submarines inflicted on Allied shipping, escorting convoys through waters where merchantmen were routinely sent to the bottom. Later, Williamson had served as an instructor at the Navy's Subchaser school in Miami, preparing sonar operators for the demanding work of anti-submarine warfare. He had also commanded a small wooden-hulled patrol craft along the U.S. coast before being assigned to England for service in the Pacific. He brought to his new role a combination of technical mastery, battle knowledge, and an uncompromising insistence on precision. England's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Walton B. Pendleton, was a career officer with a more reserved style. Recognizing Williamson's drive and ability, he wisely allowed his executive officer broad authority to prepare the ship for war. Under their combined leadership, the crew grew increasingly confident, even brash, through months of non-stop exercises. Yet Williamson and the handful of veterans aboard knew that only the crucible of real combat would prove whether their ship was truly ready. That test came on May 18, 1944, when Escort Division 39, consisting of England, George, and Raby, set out on their mission to hunt down the Japanese submarine I-16. As dusk fell, the three destroyer escorts steamed into the waters northwest of Buon, maintaining a formation spaced roughly 4,000 yards apart and sweeping the ocean with sonar. By midday the following day, the tension had mounted when Roger Bernhard, a teenage sonar operator aboard England, suddenly reported contact. The officer of the deck at first dismissed it as a school of fish, since I-16 was thought to be far from that location. But Bernhard stood firm. His confidence in the clarity of the sonar return impressed his superiors, and the ship immediately shifted from training mode to real combat. The crew, drilled to near perfection, raced to their stations, while George and Raby held position, and England closed in for the attack. After confirming the target was indeed a submarine, England fired her first hedgehog salvo. Bernhard maintained sonar contact even as the weapons splashed ahead, though no explosions followed. A second attack at 1350 hours produced a single muted detonation, a sign of a glancing hit that had damaged but not destroyed the enemy. England pressed on with repeated attack runs, but after two more unsuccessful attempts, Pendleton, frustrated, yielded control to Williamson. The young executive officer took charge of maneuvering the ship for another run. On the fifth attempt, he judged the moment right and ordered the hedgehog fired. Several projectiles struck home, followed seconds later by a series of sharp impacts. Then, at 1433 hours, the ocean erupted in a tremendous underwater explosion that shook the England violently. The blast was so powerful that it knocked men to the deck and lifted the ship's fantail completely clear of the water. For a moment the crew believed they had been torpedoed, but it quickly became evident that the explosion was the death throes of I-16. The Japanese submarine had been destroyed, and England had just earned her first kill in what would become one of the most extraordinary anti-submarine campaigns of the entire war. The destruction of I-16 meant the end for Lieutenant Tucci and the 106 sailors who had been trapped inside her steel hull. The sea soon revealed traces of the violence that had unfolded beneath its surface. Parties sent from George and Raby found broken timbers, fragments of cork, and other pieces of wreckage drifting in the swells, unmistakable signs of a shattered submarine. Even more chilling was the sudden gathering of sharks thrashing in the area, drawn by what the ocean now concealed, serving as a stark reminder of the lives just lost. When a 75-pound sack of rice was recovered, Commander Haynes became convinced that his destroyer escorts had indeed eliminated a Japanese supply boat. Through the long hours of the night, England, George, and Raby held their patrol around the scene, watching as a thick oil slick, nearly 3 miles wide and 6 miles in length, spread across the water's surface, a dark stain marking the submarine's grave. The Allies were not relying solely on the destroyer escorts to track down Otta's submarines. Reconnaissance aircraft ranged far out across the sea, probing deep into the sectors where the Japanese commander had positioned his nay line. On May 17th, one American patrol plane reported sighting row 104 near the northern boundary of the line, transmitting its discovery by radio. Although Japanese cryptographic abilities lagged far behind those of the Americans, their operators were more than capable of intercepting unencrypted or plain voice reports like this one. Realizing that his picket screen had been detected, Admiral Otta reacted swiftly, sending coded messages to his scattered submarines instructing them to shift their patrol line 60 miles westward. Unfortunately for him, Frupak was listening. The American Signals Intelligence Unit intercepted Otta's order, and within hours the code-breaking team at Pearl Harbor unraveled it. With remarkable speed, the analysts mapped the precise coordinates of each Japanese submarine along the revised nay line. In less than 2 days, this vital information was on Admiral Halsey's desk, hand-delivered by courier so the Third Fleet could act without delay. The timing and geography were favorable. Escort Division 39 was positioned perfectly to intercept, and late on May 20th, an order reached Commander Haynes from Third Fleet. The message stated that 7 Japanese submarines were preparing to take up positions, roughly 30 miles apart between the Admiralty base at Manus and Truk. The directive was simple: locate them, engage them, and destroy them. Haynes devised a plan that was straightforward, yet aggressive. His intention was to strike at the northernmost. Boat first, eliminate it, and then drive southwestward, systematically trapping and sinking each of the others in succession. This strategy meant crossing the invisible boundary dividing Admiral Chester Nimitz's Pacific Ocean Command and General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Area of Operations. But such a move was authorized when pursuing enemy vessels that were fleeing. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 22nd, as the destroyer searched methodically, a radar operator aboard George suddenly reported a contact 14,000 yards off the starboard bow. The return looked like a surfaced submarine. At once, the 3 escorts surged forward at full speed, eager to catch their quarry before it slipped beneath the waves. On the submarine's bridge, Lieutenant Uda, captain of Row 106, spotted George's beam of light as it swept across his conning tower. He attempted to react, but with no time to bring deck guns or torpedoes into action, he ordered a crash dive. The boat plunged beneath the surface as the destroyers closed in, their sonar operators straining to hold contact. At 0414, George fired a spread of hedgehog projectiles, but the attack was unsuccessful and the contact was temporarily lost. England, however, had locked on to the submarine, her sound operators clearly tracing the echoes of the rowboat as it tried to evade. Pendleton quickly took charge, directing his crew to prepare for a firing run, but his initial attempt yielded no result. Frustrated, or perhaps believing luck favored his executive officer, Pendleton handed control to Williamson, whose earlier steady leadership had brought England her first victory. At 0444, Williamson maneuvered the ship into position and ordered the Hedgehog battery to fire. The weapons streaked into the sea, spreading out ahead of the bow. Seconds later, 3 of the contact-fused bombs struck home, detonating roughly 275 feet below. The shockwave reverberated through the water and, moments afterward, a massive underwater explosion tore Row 106 apart. Lieutenant Uda and all 49 men aboard were killed instantly, their boat obliterated in the depths. England had achieved another kill, her second in less than a week. As dawn broke, lookouts aboard George observed a widening oil slick and pieces of timber drifting in the swells near the site of the attack. It was sufficient confirmation that Row 106 had been destroyed. Without pause, the hunter-killer group pressed on, steering toward the sector where Row 104, commanded by Lieutenant Hiroshi Abe, was believed to be patrolling. By evening, the 3 destroyer escorts were tightening the noose. As darkness gathered, Haynes ordered the ships to widen their intervals to 16,000 yards apart, an adjustment meant to improve the chances of spotting a submarine running on the surface in the fading light. The tactic worked, setting the stage for another confrontation as Escort Division 39 continued its relentless sweep through the Japanese patrol line. The clash that morning unfolded with the tension of a duel that had been long in the making. At precisely 0600 on May 23rd, Raby's radar team reported a contact bearing 085 degrees at about 8,000 yards. The blip was Row 104, and though it managed to duck under Raby's guns by using its receiver to detect incoming emissions, it could not escape the sonar ping sent from above. The submarine's captain, experienced and quick-thinking, began a desperate sequence of maneuvers, alternating speed, direction, and depth, evading 4 determined runs by George and 3 hedgehog barrages from Raby. In an almost defiant twist, Row 104 turned its own sonar outward, pinging on American frequencies to create confusion and hesitation on the surface. This back-and-forth chess game of sound and countersound stretched on for more than 2 hours. Finally, at 0819, with irritation clear in his voice, Commander Haynes ordered his weary ships to stand down and yield to England. The small but deadly escort moved in, her reputation for efficiency already making her the division's sharpest blade. On her first attempt, Pendleton commanded a brief hedgehog salvo to starboard, but then, once again, as he had done before, deferred to Williamson, whose instincts had already led the ship to victory. At 0834, Williamson ordered a full hedgehog pattern. Seconds later, 12 or more detonations were heard, followed by the ominous thunder of a massive undersea blast. 58 Japanese sailors had perished in an instant. At Haynes's insistence, England followed up with 13 depth charges to be absolutely certain. Soon an oil slick spread across the sea, accompanied by fragments of wood marked with Japanese characters, broken deck planking, cork stoppers, and the sinister presence of sharks thrashing among the wreckage. The crew's exultation was shadowed by the grim reality of lives lost below the waves. That afternoon, Williamson, crossing paths with a young sailor in the wardroom, was confronted with the raw emotion of the situation. The seaman asked how many men had likely been aboard the submarines England had sunk. Williamson estimated between 40 and 80, depending on the type of boat. "How do you feel about killing all those men?" the young man asked. Williamson, caught off guard, answered honestly, "This was a war where survival depended on sinking the enemy before they could strike, and the sooner Japan's submarines were destroyed, the sooner the war might end." His words seemed to reassure the sailor, but for Williamson, the question never stopped echoing in his thoughts. The hunters pressed onward, steaming down the Na line. At a 1:22 on May 24th, George's radar lit up with another surface contact 14,000 yards out. This was Row 116, commanded by Lieutenant Tokashio Oka. The submarine dove immediately after its detectors picked up George's radar signature, but Oka proved to be a masterful opponent. He ordered sudden fishtail maneuvers, sharp dives, and rapid ascents, keeping his pursuers guessing. George, Raby, and even England initially failed to land a decisive blow. Recognizing that this was no ordinary adversary, Pendleton turned once again to his executive officer. Williamson assumed tactical command, supported by soundman John Prock and Roger Bernhard, both of whom had been instrumental in earlier hunts. Prock, thinking creatively, suggested a tactic that went against standard practice. Normally, the sonar. Team increased ping rates during an attack run, but this only served as a warning to subs below. Instead, Prock advised keeping the ping steady, giving the enemy no clue that an attack was imminent. On the next approach, Williamson shouted the order to fire. At 02:14, 24 hedgehogs dropped in quick succession. A handful detonated at about 180 feet. There was no single crushing explosion, yet by dawn, floating cork, pieces of decking, and oil confirmed Row 116's fate. Navy intelligence later confirmed that all 56 men aboard were lost. After nearly a week at sea, fatigue and dwindling stores were catching up with the hunters. Ammunition and fuel were running low, and the group was nearing the operational boundary of General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Command, where their presence was forbidden unless directly pursuing an enemy. Haynes was faced with a difficult decision: withdraw to Piva Bay for resupply or continue deeper into contested waters. Relief came when Task Group 30.4, centered around escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay, arrived on May 26 under Captain William V. Saunders. Ordered to reinforce anti-submarine sweeps after news of Escort Division 39's string of successes, Saunders directed Haynes to Seidler Harbor at Manus in the Admiralty Islands. But Pendleton, hungry for more victories, suggested bending their course along the enemy's Na line instead of heading straight to port. With approval granted, the destroyer escorts pressed forward. On the night of May 26th, Raby reported a radar contact at 180 degrees, 14,000 yards away. Within moments, England's radar confirmed it. Row 108. commanded by Lieutenant Kenichi Obari. The destroyers closed in, but when Raby stumbled in positioning, England surged to the forefront. Williamson, calm and precise, slowed the ship to 10 knots, lined her up for a bow attack, and at 23:23 unleashed a hedgehog barrage. Almost instantly muffled explosions rumbled from 250 feet down, signaling the end of row 108 and the 58 sailors, trapped inside. By morning, the sea itself confirmed the kill. Oil slicks stretching wide, fragments of polished mahogany bearing Japanese inscriptions, even parts of a timepiece case, shards of lives that had ended in silence. On May 27th, the hunters reached Manus at 1500 hours, where USS Spangler awaited with urgently needed hedgehog rounds. After a night of refueling and rearming, the flotilla returned to their patrol lanes. For 2 days, the seas remained quiet, until May 30 brought the start of their most grueling duel yet. That morning, one of Saunders's destroyers made contact, but, lacking hedgehogs, was forced to rely on depth charges. Haynes ordered England and Spangler south to sweep, while George and Raby provided support. The quarry was row 105, commanded by Lieutenant Junichi Anu, with Captain Ranosu Shukata embarked as senior officer. Over the next 30 hours, the battle became a trial of endurance and skill. George and Raby pressed repeated hedgehog attacks, landing occasional strikes, but never finishing the sub. Row 105 retaliated with deception, spilling oil, scattering debris, venting tanks to simulate damage, each trick buying time. Just after dusk, in a bold move, the submarine surfaced and launched 2 torpedoes. Both missed, but the gesture revealed a foe determined to fight to the last. Through the night, George and Raby kept hammering away, knowing the sub would eventually be forced up again as her batteries and air ran low. At 0300, she surfaced once more between the 2 escorts, and though neither managed a shot, Raby caught her for a moment in a searchlight before she slipped beneath the waves. 30 miles to the northwest, England saw the flash of light and sped to the scene with Spangler. Over ship-to-ship radios, one crew taunted Williamson to stay clear, claiming they would finish off the crippled sub themselves. Haynes overruled, keeping England and Spangler at a cautious distance while George and Raby held sonar contact. As dawn broke, the pursuit resumed. George and Raby struck first with hedgehogs and missed. Spangler dashed in, her own salvo falling short. Finally, at 0736 on May 31st, England was called in. Williamson aligned his ship, gave the order, and a cluster of 10 or more hedgehogs exploded at 180 feet. Minutes later, a massive blast tore through row 105, ending the struggle and the lives of 55 men. Oil, timber, and circling sharks marked the site. In 12 days, USS England had sunk 6 submarines, an unparalleled feat in naval history. But the broader implications reached far beyond tallying kills. With his picket line shattered, Admiral Oda feared the Americans were preparing major offensives southward, and Admiral Toyota, unnerved by the losses, began redeploying Japanese forces away from the Marianas. Consequently, when U.S. invasion, forces sailed for Saipan, Tinian, and Guam in mid-June. Many defenders who might have stood against them were no longer in place. Historians would later argue that England's victories had shaped the Pacific Campaign itself. Admiral Ernest King praised the achievement as perhaps the most brilliant anti-submarine operation ever conducted. Security demanded secrecy, and the details, including Frupak's vital intelligence work, remained hidden for years, only declassified long after the war. The men of George and Raby, too, won recognition for their contributions. Though England delivered the killing blows, it was their persistence that created the opportunities. England's crew was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, one of only 3 destroyer escort crews in the war to receive it. Pendleton, decorated with the Navy Cross and promoted to commander, was sent to lead a new division in Alaska. Williamson, whose steady leadership and tactical brilliance had guided England through every engagement, received the greatest honor of all. Appointed her commanding officer, he led her back to sea in September, carrying with him the legacy of 12 relentless days that had